All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today with Hannah Benedict. Hannah is actually with Mending the Soul, works for us. She teaches our online facilitator training. So if you have taken that class, you may see the name and think that looks familiar. So Hannah has been gracious enough today to come and share her story of divorce with us. I asked Hannah specifically because her story is unique in that from the very beginning, I knew Hannah when this was happening. She intentioned very intentionally that she would do this positively and that she would do it in as healthy way as possible for her and her two boys. So Hannah has a background in
education.
Yeah, education, thank you. And is currently finishing up her degree, her master's degree in counseling. And so she does work mostly with kids, and she has done some work with some mission agencies and things as well. So she's very well-rounded. Hannah and her husband were married for 13 years. They met when she was 13, and had a very short courtship in college that she'll tell us about. And then a little over a decade into their relationship, things kind of started to fall apart. And so I'm going to let Hannah tell her story in the only she can, and then we'll jump into the questions. If you have any questions for her as things pop up, just type them into the Q&A box or into the chat box, and we'll get them at the end of the session together. So Hannah, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Sounds good. So like Stephanie said, that I met my ex-husband when we were 13 years old. He was the cousin of one of my really good friends. So he was just all throughout my teenage years, just my good friend's really annoying cousin. In fact, there's pictures that prove it of him giving me like bunny ears at the birthday parties and things like that. And then we both started working at church around the same time. In our early 20s, I was still in college and was doing an internship in the children's ministries, and he was working in the building maintenance and custodial work, and they were doing a big addition and stuff. And so we just started hanging out, reconnecting, and it was like, wow, this guy's really cool, really nice. What I think is unique to my story, and both of our stories, I think some to agree, is that we were raised in the 90s where with the whole purity movement, courtship, the book I Kissed Dating Goodbye was super popular. And this idea of saving yourself for the one was really ingrained in both of us and in our stories. And so for me, that meant I didn't really date. I didn't date at all in high school. I didn't go to prom, nothing like that. And so when all of a sudden this guy, and I had a heart, I wanted to get married. Mm-hmm. So when all of a sudden this guy starts showing attention to me, I was really flattered. But it wasn't like a weird, awkward. We still just really enjoyed each other, enjoyed a lot of the same things, doing the same things. We'd known each other. But one of the things that even from the very beginning, my ex-husband's family wanted to be very much in our part of our courtship, and that became a source of tension between my ex-husband and his parents as he put up some boundaries to that. But he did go to my dad and ask if he could date me with the intention of marriage. So he went into our dating time with the intention that we would get married, and I knew that. My dad was really wise in saying, like, it's okay to date my daughter, but that's her decision to make as far as marriage goes. But we started dating, and we were married 13 months later. So we, it didn't take long for him to convince me, and we settled into a really happy life together. For the most part, it was really good. Our relationship was good. We rarely fought. We enjoyed doing the same things. We did a lot of stuff together. I'd say the one area of our life that we never seemed to be able to get on the same page was physically. Matt always seemed to want more. And the bar just seemed to get higher and higher. And I felt like I could never reach it, never make that attainable where he was asking me to be. So we, are for the most part enjoying life together. We start to have kids. Around the time that we had 2 boys, or we still have 2 boys, but around the time that our youngest was 2 and 3, we went through some really big changes in jobs and things like that. And with very little savings and not much backing, we decided to start our own business, construction business. And so, I mean, talk about a lot of work and intense time. So for that year, there seemed to be kind of a distance growing in our relationship, a lot of stress. And I chalked it up to just he's fully putting himself into a business. I'm fully putting myself into raising our 2 kids. We'd never used the word divorce in our marriage. It wasn't something we threw around. We didn't come from families where divorce was common. I think like in my family, it's not. There's nothing in the generations around me that with divorce or anything, and not much in his family either. And so, it wasn't even an option for us, what I thought. But during that time as well, somebody that we'd both known in high school reached out to specifically Matt, just as she had known him more, his family more in high school, was going through a difficult time in her own marriage. And we started to just kind of help step in and invite her over. It started to feel uncomfortable. The relationship did. I kept saying like, this doesn't feel right. And he kept pushing back. And then when I pushed long enough, he finally said, okay, I'll pull back. And I said, I'll invest in that relationship. So I did. And at the same time, he didn't pull back like he said he was. I didn't know that at the time. I do now. But during the summer 7 years ago, we had a much needed day away at the beach. And it just all throughout the day, things felt off, like just even more so than normal. And he was on his phone a lot, and we just could not seem to connect. It just was off. And I remember walking away from our family just at one point off on my own and thinking like, something's not right. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know that that something's off. So Lord, whatever it is, would you be here? Which at that point in my relationship with the Lord was a pretty daring prayer for me. I'd been raised in church, but some other circumstances in our life had made just my faith, I think, really rocky, something that I was really just at that point starting to personalize, to really work through and unpack some of those really, those stories of kind of fairy tale stories of like, well, God's going to answer every single prayer and all of that. And so on that car ride home, my ex-husband asked if I wanted to rent a movie, which was pretty typical. We picked something up and rent it from Redbox, and after our kids went to bed, would watch it. And so I said, sure, but can I use your phone? And while you're driving, I'll look up what movies are available. Because I didn't have internet on my phone at the time. And so he handed me his phone, and instead of going to the internet, I went to his text messages and discovered a whole like text messages that were extremely inappropriate between him and this gal. So just keep in mind that I'm in a car with sitting next to my now ex-husband, and in the back of the car are my two kids that are in the car with me when I find this. And I remember just feeling my world like crumbling all around me. I remember my legs shaking and just the loss of really an awareness of everything that was going on. We got home. I don't remember much, but I remember getting out of the car and just walking away and leaving him to take care of the kids and everything, because I knew that I couldn't do it. I couldn't even process it, couldn't even fathom what I had seen and read in those text messages. I came back. He left for a while, came back, said that he'd made some phone calls, that was done. He realized that he wasn't being respectful to either of us. That at that point that it seemed like, okay, but I was like, we're going to need some help. Well, that very next day, I had a house full of guests for the next 2 weeks when his dad and sister showed up and her kids for the week. So he was continuing to work. I was entertaining family, which left little time for us to process what had happened and what had uncovered until that Wednesday night. Was delivering some stuff to a job late, and I jumped in the car with him. And I often refer to it as the ride from hell, because I think it's really where all of a sudden I thought, who is this man? This isn't the man that I married. The words and the thoughts that were coming out of his mouth were so unlike him. It really boiled down to, for him, that I wasn't able to meet his needs physically, and that was not a way that he wanted to live anymore. And I remember thinking, my gosh, this is something that we can work on. And that was the first time he used the words divorce. We got home that night. He dropped me off. It was probably about midnight. I tiptoed through a house full of sleeping people, crawled into bed, and he drove away. And he came back the next morning to say goodbye to his family that was leaving, and then left. And for that next month, he was extremely erratic. Behavior was all over the map. He would be gone. I wouldn't have any idea where he was. He would accuse me of things, twist things. In many, many ways, it felt like the man that I'd married was dying or had been hijacked. So about a month into this, I realized that this is not a safe place for me and my two boys. They're 3 and 5 years old at this time. I've got a kiddos getting ready to start kindergarten. So the week that he's supposed to start kindergarten, I'm pulling him from that school, registering him at a new school, and packing up our bags to move in with my parents. I thought we'd be there for maybe a month or two as we tried to sort through, maybe until Christmas time at the most, as we tried to sort through and unpack what was going on. So we literally just took the clothes with us that we needed. During this month of September, I showed up one day to get gas, and my credit card was denied. I was cut off in the bank accounts. Anytime that he had any time with the kids, he wouldn't talk to me. wouldn't even really look at me. If we did have a conversation, it was irrational and all over the place. In October, a knock on my parents' door, and I was served divorce papers. In November, I opened up my email one Saturday morning to find an email from him telling me that he and this gal were expecting a baby. That following December, right after all of these blows, I get we're meeting in the parking lot to exchange kids, and he gets out of the car and he's bawling. And he says, oh my gosh, I made a big mistake. I want to work on things. And I said, okay, because all along I believed that God, I prayed and I begged God to heal my husband, to heal and redeem our marriage. And this felt like that answer. And at first, those first maybe week, it really felt like it did. But as much as I tried to do different things to change myself, I couldn't make Matt choose us. I couldn't make Matt choose me. And after about 6 months, it became pretty apparent that he was unable or unwilling to be able to do the work to restore our marriage. And so at that point, I asked him for a divorce. It was probably about another 6 months before we finally put the paperwork through, sold the house, did all of that. But I think that was the hardest part for me, was letting go of that ideal fairy tale story, happy ending, and letting go of that part of my story. So yeah, that's.
So when we talked about this before, you had mentioned that there was a moment where you thought, I have to do this well.
Yeah. Yeah. So that night, after I found the text messages, I think that prayer came back that I'd prayed earlier in the beach. And I have this and I've held on to it many times, distinct moment. I was sitting on the couch in our living room, and I remember thinking, I can do this and become really angry and bitter, and hold on to this, or I can do this well. I can choose to press into the really hard things, and cling to God through it all, or I can walk away and try and do it on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And there have definitely been moments where I've wanted to throw in the towel and say it's not worth it. But overall, and I look at who I am now, I see of pressing in, not holding on to a picture, but rather pressing into whatever that looks like. More emotionally, I guess, than
right.
physical.
At what point do you think your focus switched from I have to save my marriage to I need to be okay? The kids need to be okay.
I think that in that 6-month period, so between Christmas and that summer, I think that I kept this, I did all sorts of things. I went out and I bought the fancy lingerie. I tried everything that I could. And I felt so dirty, used, and realized that I was losing myself in trying to save my marriage.
Yeah.
It was during this time that when my ex-husband had first come back, or had said, hey, like, can we try and work on things? We had gone to one counseling appointment, and it was not fit. And like I said, I'm not sure why or what wasn't working, but he wasn't able to engage in that counseling. And so I said, oh, I need to be in counseling. So I had started in on counseling. I think that was the first time that somebody had said, you know, like, to me, you, like, divorce was always wrong. Like, you know, I was raised in a Christian home. Like, you know, divorce was wrong. You don't divorce. Like, it wasn't anything in my family story. But all of a sudden, I'm faced with this. I also don't know that I can fight so hard for something that somebody else isn't willing to engage in or fight with.
Yeah.
And that in many ways, this is not putting me, like, I made the decision to move out of our house maybe sooner than others would have, of what that was doing with my kid and myself. I'm very thankful we had a safe place to land. And that was really protective. It was protective of my kids. And I think that all along has been how do I remain that stable person for my children? Because I know that stability is key for them in growing up and that attachment and all of that. So how do I facilitate that for them and for myself? Because that's key for myself. And as hard as it's been, letting go of fighting and trusting that God is bigger and stronger than I could ever dream or imagine, and that his ways are bigger and stronger than I could ever imagine, that I can trust him with that, and I can trust him with myself in my heart.
Yeah. You were also doing things to make yourself more financially, and even, I would say, relationally, mentally independent.
Yeah. So there's always that, okay, so like after our first son was born, stopped working full-time and had worked minimal part-time jobs, teaching workshops and things like that, nothing that could sustain a family. And so as I was like, oh my gosh, I gotta, like, figure out how am I gonna raise 2 kids and provide for them. And at the same time, I didn't want to put them in daycare and go back to work. I think that there is a time and place for that, and many moms do that, and that works for their families. It wasn't something I wanted to do. And so started being creative, thinking like, what is that going to look like? I'd had a dream to go back and get my master's in counseling, looked into it. At that point, I had no money. And so the thought of, going to school for 3 years with no money to pay for it, anything like that, just wasn't in the cards. And so I did do a program where I got a coaching certificate in parent coaching. And at the same time, during a tour for my youngest to go to preschool, got hired to teach kindergarten. And I mean, it was just like, literally, like, God was like, okay, then this is the next step for you. The next step for you. And that job gave us the finances to be able to move out of my parents' home. The same week that we moved out of my parents' home, somebody anonymously said, we've seen how you have been doing this, and when we want to help you out for a month or for a year with this amount of money. It was the exact amount that we were just in deficit to make it on our own. The year that stopped, a friend of mine at church said, hey, I work for this business coaching, and they're always hiring. You should interview. I interviewed, and literally the month that stopped, I got hired on with them and was able to do coaching on top of teaching. And during that season, saved up enough money to be able to go back to school and pursue my degree. And so it's been like this intentional shift for me of like, how do I intentionally do this? We live super simply, which is part of my just nature and growing up, but like, how do I provide well for my kids? And again, trust that God is also my provider and will show up in those places where I'm going, this in how I look at this doesn't make sense. These last 3 years that I've been in school, grad school, has been just story after story of how he's shown up and been so faithful.
Yeah, that's amazing. And at some point in this, you did a Mending the Soul group.
Yeah. So about 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, a really good friend of mine had gone through Mending the Soul herself and wanted to get some groups started at our church. And she said, for that first group that she was going to lead, she's like, come on, Hannah, you got to do it. And at this point, I had a really hard time labeling what I had experienced as abuse and trauma. I think because my marriage hadn't been horrible. Like I didn't have these like, oh my gosh, I can't, that was so awful. Every day was such a challenge. It was more like a life was fine. And one day a light bulb, some switch flipped and all of a sudden it was horrid. And so I had a really hard time. So I think she was finally like, well, you could help facilitate. And I was like, well, fine. For other people, I'll do it afterwards. So like, do it and then you can. And so I, go through and oh my gosh, it like I said, I'd been in counseling, but there was something about the timeline, the wheel of abuse, where there was language that was given to me that I didn't like. And even multiple times since that I've gone through and been a facilitator of groups, that wheel of abuse has gotten, shaded in more and more.
Yeah.
As I
think that's impactful for everybody because that's exactly right. Is they wouldn't call it abuse and then they look at it and they're like, well, that's actually happened.
Yeah.
I guess when you put it that way.
when you say it that way, okay. Definitely. Yeah. And so I think that, and I think recognizing like the first time through, you just like scratching the surface.
Yeah.
It's that repeated like over and over you like experience.
Yeah.
There's different layers, there's different things that you're unpacking. I think that's God's graciousness to us to not inundate us with it all at one time.
Right.
But the timeline for me was super helpful in unpacking where certain behaviors started in my story, how those influenced future decisions, and how do I start to begin to break the cycle of those. I think that's where that intentionally like learning and working through this and growing through this has come is like, I recognize that there was very unhealthy things in Matt that caused, and whatever that is, but it's not all without, like, he's not just the only one. There were things in my life and how I showed up in my lack of being able to voice my opinions, voice my needs, my feelings that contributed to what happened in our marriage. And that's been important for me to work through, no matter if it's a marriage relationship, a parenting relationship, a friendship, my relationship with my parents, my sisters, however at work. That's like that growth will be exponential.
Yeah. How have you learned to identify and give language to your needs and desires?
That has been and continues to be an ongoing journey. I
Mm-hmm.
think one of the biggest things that it started with that the Mending the Soul, the workbook. There's the exercise there. There's the feeling words list, and then you're to sit with a timer for 5 minutes and write. I feel blank when.
Right.
And the first time I sat down and did that, I was like, whoo, there was some really like venomous things that was hiding inside of me that came out there. I think I wrote way beyond those 5 minutes. And that is something that I continue to do to this day. In my journal is a feelings word list. And I would say at least once or twice a week, sit down, some seasons even more, and write. I feel whatever it is when, and I'll often just sit and say, what words are jumping out at me? And why would that word jump out at me? Because they jump out for different reasons. And often the times I'm like, oh, that's because I'm feeling out of control in this situation. Or that really, like, I'm feeling, I'm reacting in anger because I'm actually feeling abandoned. And I think that is one of, I think, been the hardest things for me to continue to work through is that when you divorce and you have children, you are still in constant relationship. There continues to be things that need to be forgiven over and over and in that daily. And so if I am not super tuned into how I'm responding emotionally, then I can start to respond out of spite, out of hate, out of abandonment, out of betrayal. There's the big betrayal that happened, and then there's all these little betrayals.
Well, because your parenting was, when you guys got married and when you started having kids, you were on the same page about morals, rules, spirituality.
Yes, how we discipline.
Yeah, and he's not on that page and hasn't been for a while. So your parenting was someone, I think it'd be safe to say, you don't agree with a lot.
You know, somebody gave me some great language recently. It helped me so much. They said, I don't feel safe in my co-parenting relationship.
Yeah.
And that was such a aha, because typically when I think of like I'm parenting with somebody, there's safety in that. I feel like somebody has my back that can step in when I'm, down and not able to, when I've reached my limit or I'm really exhausted, I feel like that there's that co-parenting team. But I don't feel safe in that relationship. And that has helped me be able to, okay, that's okay for me to feel that way. This is not a safe relationship anymore. That's okay.
Yeah. I'm curious what role you think shame played in not only your attraction to your ex-husband and why you were okay with some of the dynamics there, but also the divorce process.
Yeah. Soon after, like in that month where things were just going crazy, soon after I found those text messages, we were arguing, which was very unusual for us. And I kept saying something like, I'm afraid that. And he said, sounds like you're afraid of pretty much everything. And I stepped back and was like, what do you mean? Like, walked in the house. I don't remember if it was right after that or soon after that, and looked at this little 3x5 card that I'd written a Bible verse on that was sitting on my kitchen window by my thing. And it said, it was Psalms 34 verses 3 and 4. And it says, I cried out to the Lord and he answered me. He set me free from all my fears. I was like, okay. But what really struck me was verse 4. It says, those who I cried out to the Lord, he answered me, he set me free from all my fears. Those who look to him will radiate with joy. No shadow of shame will darken their face. And that no shadow of shame just like brought me down to my knees. And I realized that my fear was all based in shame. And that shame kept me in a place, this fear of rejection was all based in shame. This hiding, don't look at me, don't see me, was based in the shame of who I am. And if I show you who I really am, that you'll reject me. So here I am faced with the biggest rejection of my life. And in a place where I felt like I'd experienced some healing from some of that hiding, just in, and I'm being rejected. And I started writing out my fears and basically crying out to the Lord in my fears. So I started making lists of, I'm afraid that I'm going to get fat. I'm afraid that I'm ugly and that nobody will ever find me beautiful. I'm afraid that I'm not going to be able to sleep at night tonight. I'm afraid that that dream's going to come. I'm afraid that I'm going to yell at my kids today because I have no patience left. And just started writing down all these fears. And the freedom that came in recognizing those fears, rather than them happening, they started not happening. And the fears that felt really big, God started meeting me in those places. And it was really powerful to see that.
That verse, that when you told me that in the pre-interview, I teared up. I don't know if you saw that. And I just, again, I thought surely I won't be emotional again, but I think, and I told you in the pre-interview, I love that even though your ex is the one that kind of like shot it back at you, that in the quietness of you with Jesus, that he was the one to say, it's okay. This is what it is. I got you. And I think that's just beautiful. Makes me want to cry.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're making me tear up now.
I had no idea.
We're going to have a cry fest.
What has been the most difficult part of holding to the intent of healing in mind and honoring that intent?
I think when I started out that I had this idea that if I held up my end of the bargain, God would hold up his end. And that I would end up with one of these like fairy tale, we got remarried, that all of a sudden whoever that was that hijacked my ex-husband like left and he came back, whatever that was. And the years as we move down this road and that gets further and further away from being a reality, it makes it harder sometimes to say like, God, this is really hard. So like there are some really beautiful things and parts and days to my life. I have two beautiful and wonderful boys that I just adore, and we have so many adventures together. I'm in grad school and I love it. God provided this amazing house for us that's beyond my wildest dreams. I was actually just looking through my journal this morning and seeing how like just prayers have been answered, but there are moments that I wake up and I think in my life when I'm in my bed by myself, or I'm going to bed at night. And I think one of the things that has been hardest, I was telling this to a dear friend the other day, is that when I lay down at bed at night and all of those, like, you're not good enough, you're never going to make it, those lies start to come in. I don't have anybody except the Lord to be able to like speak truth over me. And in those dark moments, that can be really hard. And I think that is something that we miss in like when we see in our like singleness. I wasn't prepared for that piece of,
Mm-hmm.
you know, not, you know, when I'm like looking and going, oh, this isn't working or whatever, somebody coming and saying, oh, I can help you with that or whatever. It feels very vulnerable to always be saying, can you help me? Or to go to a girlfriend and saying like, hey, I'm really struggling. I just need somebody to say like, you're okay.
Yeah.
You know, and thankfully I have a community that does that, but I still have to ask.
Yeah. We talked a lot about, you have a group of women that you knew long before this happened with Matt, like right around the time your first was born, that you had connected with. And you guys had a pretty good, like, we meet every week for play dates since
Yes.
going. You want to tell us a little bit more about that group? And
Yeah. So we, you know, like we have kids and all of a sudden you realize, man, I gotta find
really lonely.
And so this group of women had formed out of that. And, you know, in that summer, we had somebody in that group move away. Somebody else was having some other like job losses, just different things. And in the, like, I wanted to push them away. And I remember them saying, whoa, you have been not like responding like normal. What's going on? And them coming over and like sitting in my living room and hearing what was happening and saying, we've got you. Them checking in with me regularly. They are still key parts of my life. I was just with a couple of them this morning. Our kids are now older. They've been raised together. They act more like cousins than they do friends, meaning that you get both love and hate from them. But it took a lot of vulnerability for me to let them in. I'm very much somebody who wants to let you in once I've cleaned it all up, not when it's really messy and when it's really hard. But it was in that vulnerability that has brought depth to our relationship, as well as it has, I think, given us all permission to come in our messy. That I've often said that I remember I felt like I was falling, but I knew I wasn't going to crash because I had this net around me that caught me.
I think with any grief or recovery, there is this sense, and most people hesitate, that if I step off the ledge and feel this, there's no end to it.
Yeah.
So, you know, a lot of the work I do as a therapist and in Mending the Soul is you just have to take that step because there is an end, there is a net, you will be caught. And that stepping off often feels like you're just stepping into the abyss.
Yeah.
Almost everybody that I've spoken to has that sense that analogy resonates with them for sure.
Yeah. I think that one of the things what you just said is that one of the things I found really helpful in all of this for counseling, and I feel like I'm, you know, plugging it just because, you know, both of us, this is our profession, but that office became my safe place.
Yeah.
So I did not have to guard what I said. I did not have to guard my feelings. I could be angry. I could cry the entire session and use an entire box of Kleenex.
Yeah.
And I went every Wednesday night for probably over a year and cried through everything and would literally cry in the parking lot for probably about an hour afterwards. And then I could pick it up enough to where I could function and move forward. She helped ask me questions that helped me unpack this stuff. And when I said, I can't go there yet, she'd back off and we'd move to other places and we'd come back. I still go back for check-ins because I think it goes back to that. I need a safe place where I don't have to keep it all together.
Right. Right. Especially when you're a single mom and you don't have that person at night to unload with. You need a place that's not judgmental, that you can just, like I call it the soft place to fall.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. We talked a little bit about the role of the church in this, and go ahead and share with me what you shared, and then I'll share kind of how, as a married woman who runs Bible studies at church, a little bit about some thoughts we both came up with when we were talking about this.
Yeah, I think it was hard for me to go back into the church as a divorced, not to go back in, but to, I guess, embrace. I mean, I never really walked away from the church during this time. Like, I continued to go on Sundays, continue to, reach out. But I remember the first time I showed up at something to start working in children's ministry, like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to because I'm divorced. And was not met by that at all, by my church or anything like that. But I think what we, and thankfully, and it has just taken doing that to overcome that for myself. But what we were talking about is that, like, small groups, there's not a place for single moms.
Right. It's probably awkward, like singles groups.
Right. I was talking with a friend actually this weekend, and the church that she's at has a single moms group that, and she said it's very healthy and active at her church. And I was like, that is the first time I have heard. Yeah. I'm so excited for you. But the church that I'm at is very much not about programming and about just doing life in community and being in community. So we have a lot of community groups. So we meet, gather together as a large church on Sunday and then scatter throughout the week. And so as I got to more stable and stuff, I was like, okay, it's time to jump into one of these community groups. And the ones that had kids my kids' age were ones that were all married. I was like, that feels really, so finally, I just kept recognizing, like, my kids need to know people beyond Sunday school. Like, they need to invest in those relationships. So we were invited to join a group where we knew one couple a little bit, not super well, but we didn't know anybody else. And I remember that first week showing up and feeling like, okay, here's the single mom, and she's going to be our project. Whether that was their intention, it just very much felt that way. And I don't know that I would have kept going, except that my kids, yes, had a blast, and they connected, and it was great. And so we kept going. And I actually can remember when there felt like this shift of, oh, she's normal. Just doesn't have a husband that comes with her. And that shift, and I really appreciated it. My kids need to be raised or be around godly men who love Jesus and love their families well.
Yeah.
That's really important to me.
Yeah. And I had shared with you that we have a group that meets in our house. It's married people with young kids. My kids are 8 and under. That we had a woman who was actually married whose husband was not a believer that wanted to come without her husband. And my sense was that's going to be really awkward. Like, because we talk about our marriages and we talk about our kids and we talk about married life. Like, it's so different. I also worried about, I was raised by a single mom, and she had her unhealthy views of married people and baggage associated with that and opinions of that. And like, what if, the other women think this woman is seducing their husbands, or like, your ex-husband said that he was helping this single woman. So what if that happens? And, all of these things swirling around, and really was touched by what you said, because I thought, really we're supposed to be ministering to the widows and the orphans, not in a, hey, you needy little pathetic thing, can I help you? But you belong to us. You're a part of us. Join us in the journey. And if we're so exclusive in our Married with Kids group that we can't walk with somebody whose life doesn't look exactly the same, then maybe we're not doing something right. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, I think that if we surround ourselves with only people that look like us, that's doing a disservice to us, that we all bring different parts of our stories, of our life. And I think no matter what, like, we can start to equate, well, you're healthy if you're married and you're unhealthy if you're divorced.
Yes.
So you can be unhealthy married and you can be healthy as a divorced.
Yes.
Like, and so like, I think it's more like, what are the things that I would always, I put guards up with my, especially my really close friends and their husbands. Like I'm very like open and honest, like on how we interact, what that looks like, and put those guards in place so that they don't have to worry about those boundaries being crossed, and that there can be that there. I want to carry that. And it's on their husbands too, but I'm not going to be putting myself in that position. I want to earn their trust.
Yes.
In that shows to me a sign of health, just as I would be expecting their husbands to not be putting me in an uncomfortable position. That's a sign of health with them.
Right. Absolutely. And with 50% of people, at least in our churches, having an experience like yours, divorced or remarried, we're missing out on a lot if we're excluding that group of people.
Yeah, I think that's been the most surprising thing for me, is how many people come up and say, like, I thought we're just married. Like, oh yeah, this is my second marriage. And I'll be like, what? Oh, okay. And I wasn't on my radar before this.
Yeah. Yeah. So how are you more whole now than you were before?
I feel like I've come out of hiding, that I've found my voice, that I continue to find my voice, that I'm more confident and comfortable in my own skin. Yeah.
What else do you want people who are listening to know? So if somebody could have sat you down and really had your ear at the beginning of this journey, what would you say to those people?
I would say you're going to be okay. But it's not going to look anything like you imagine. So stay present in this moment and press into it. I think one of the most important questions I've learned to ask myself is, what do I need right now? Not what do I need tomorrow, not what do I need even tonight, but what do I need right now? And to not, to be intentional about being mindful of the future. Like, I'm taking steps, I'm getting education to put things in place for my family, but also walking with open hands. The other thing that I read this last night, I was reading a book, it's about World War II, and there was a Jewish lady and a Catholic priest, and the Jewish lady was performing some ritual prayers, and in them she was holding out her hands towards the light, and she said, we hold our hands to the light with our hands kept this way so that the light can shine through our fingernails, which are the most dirty parts of our soul, of our bodies, but yet the light still can shine through. And I thought, but the only way that light gets to shine through is if we hold up the light. And that just, like that image, that picture, that God's light shines through the dirty and broken, most dirty, most broken parts, but only when we bring those to the light. If I'm holding my hands closed, the light can't shine through. And I think that has been, as I've taken the broken parts of my life and shined them up to the light, the light has shone through.
We haven't had any questions so far. If anybody has any questions on Facebook or here, go ahead and type them now, and we will answer them. Casey, I see you're the only one left. Some people took off early, and that's fine. Also, we will be posting in the facilitator page. Hannah is on the facilitator page, so if you have questions, you can reach her there. But I think one of the two key things that Hannah did is really she turned towards Jesus and said, I need you to be okay. And she had a really good group of women around her. So if you're married and you don't have that, get one. Intentionally find one. Hannah gave me that advice 10 years ago before I ever had kids. Kept me sane in the moments of insanity of parenting. And if anything, even if you don't get a divorce, when the to know like the stuff you're going through with your husband is normal. I mean, I went to dinner with some friends the other night and we're all saying the same things about our husband. It's like, okay, I'm totally normal. So you need that community.
And we're all, whether it's divorce or job loss or, you know, when we start, our parents start to die or, you know, any of those, we need those people around us that just love us.
Right. Exactly. Thank you so much, Hannah, for your transparency and your story. And like I said, if anybody has any questions, we can direct them to you for resourcing mostly, I would imagine. But we hope that you found this one helpful. I'm hoping a lot of people watch the recording because I'm kind of surprised by the low attendance today, considering the high rate of divorce. So I think it was really wonderful. I think you have a really great message and story. Next week, we will be talking about learning disabilities as they're associated with trauma. Upcoming, we have Steve Tracy will be ending our summer series with the church's response to the Me Too movement. I'll be talking about protecting your kids from predators. And I think there's a couple other in there. So go to mendingthesoul.org/webinars for that information. If you have been touched by Mending the Soul Ministry, I encourage you to click the donate button when you go to mendingthesoul.org and donate right there. That is how we support our ministry. It keeps people like me employed and people like Steve and Celeste Tracy employed. So it helps us do everything that we do. It also helps us reach the hurting and the lost around the world. So thank you, everybody, for being here, and we will see you soon. Thank you, Hannah.
Bye.
Bye.